Welcome to True Voice Shorts, a curated audio series that brings fiction, memoir, and reimagined classics to life, honoring language, voice, and the legacy of storytelling. This story is part of the Whispers of Forgotten Women series, where hidden voices from history rise again. Authors whose words once struggled to find their place, yet still echo with power today. In this episode, we honor Sarah Orne Jewett, a quiet force in American literature whose stories bloom with subtle strength. Written in the late 1800s, Jewett captured the sound of rural New England and the quiet resilience of its women. Whether you're walking through shadowed woods or tending memory like a faded rose, these stories invite you to pause, listen closely, and rediscover what still lingers in the hush between lines. The Only Rose. Just where the village ended and the green mowing fields began, stood Mrs. Bickford's house, facing south with its windows looking down the road and two prim chimneys that stood up like ears. You could follow a straight path from the gate past the front door and find Mrs. Bickford sitting by the last kitchen window, unless she were solemnly stepping about, prolonging the stern duties of solitary housekeeping. One early summer day, when most everyone in Fairfield had moved houseplants outdoors, 3 flower pots still sat on Mrs. Bickford's kitchen windowsill. She spent but little time over her rose, geranium, and Jerusalem cherry trees, though they had gained a kind of personality born of long association. They rarely bloomed, but had most courageously kept living in spite of her unsympathetic yet conscientious care. Later in the season, she would carry them out and leave them under the great apple tree until frost, where they might make the best of what summer gave. They rarely bloomed, but had most courageously kept living in spite of her unsympathetic yet conscientious care. Later in the season, she would carry them out and leave them under the great apple tree until frost, where they might make the best of what summer gave them. The afternoon sun poured in. The Jerusalem cherry drooped in the heat and looked pale when a neighbor, Mrs. Pendexter, came in from the next house, but wanted to make a friendly call. As she passed the parlor with its shut blinds and the living room, also carefully shaded, she wished again that someone besides the owner might enjoy so good and pleasant a house. Mrs. Bickford often complained of having so much care, even while valuing her right to do as she pleased with one of the best houses in Fairfield. Miss Poindexter, a cheerful, even gay little person, always brought a flurry of excitement and usually had a genuine though modest piece of news to tell, or some new angle on an old bit of gossip. Mrs. Bickford smiled as she looked up to see the sprightly neighbor coming. She had no gifts at entertaining herself, and was always glad, as one might say, to be taken off her own hands. Miss Poindexter smiled back, as if she felt herself to be an equal to the occasion. "How be you today?" the guest asked kindly as she entered the kitchen. "Why, what a sight of flowers! Miss Bickford, what be you gonna do with 'em all?" Mrs. Bickford wore a grave expression as she glanced over her spectacles. "My sister's boy fetched them over," she said. "You know Sister Parsons is great with flowers, and he takes after her. He said the gardens never looked so handsomer, and she picked these to send me. They were sending a team to Wexbury for fertilizer, and he came along and stopped to eat his dinner with me. He's been growing fast and looks peaked. I expect my sister Liza thought the ride this pleasant day would do him good. She sent word for me to come over and spend a few days next week, but it ain't so I can." "Why, it's a pretty time of year to go off and make a little visit," suggested the neighbor encouragingly. "I ain't got my sitting room chamber carpet taken up yet," sighed Mrs. Bixford. "I do feel condemned. I might have had it done today, but everything stopped when I saw Tommy coming. He's a likely boy, and relished his dinner. I happen to be well prepared. I don't know, but he's my favorite of that family. I've been sitting here thinking since he left, and I can't remember ever being so belated with my spring cleaning." "'Twas owing to the weather," said Miss Pendexter. "None of us could start smart as usual, not even the ones who brag about finishing a room in March and never say when they do the rest." The two women laughed together cheerfully. Mrs. Bixford had raised the wide leaf of her large table and spread out the flowers. She was slowly sorting them into 3 heaps. "Why, I do declare if you haven't got a rose in bloom yourself," exclaimed Mrs. Pendexter, as if the bud hadn't been discussed for weeks. "Why, ain't it a lovely rose, Mrs. Bickford?" "Yes'm, it's out today," said Mrs. Bickford with a pleasant air. "I'm glad you come in to see it." The bright flower was like a face. Its beauty and life felt surprising in the plain room, like a gay little child who might suddenly appear in a doorway. Miss Pendexter forgot herself, her hostess, and the tangled heap of garden flowers as she looked at the red rose. She even forgot it was her turn to speak. Mrs. Bixford often fell into sudden silences that made her friends anxiously search their minds for conversation. But anyone looking at her now could see it wasn't lack of thought, but an over-fullness too deep for words. "Going to make up all your flowers into bouquets? I think the short-stemmed kinds is often pretty in a dish," offered Mrs. Pendexter. "I thought about 3 bouquets. I wish there wasn't quite so many. Sister Eliza's very lavish with her flowers. She's always been a kind sister," said Miss Bixford vaguely. She was not given to such sentiment, and as her neighbor studied her, she noticed unusual signs of emotion. It suddenly became clear the 3 nosegays were connected to her 3 husbands, and Miss Poindexter's curiosity gave way to quiet understanding. It was a time of year when Mrs. Bickford often visited the burying ground, sometimes inviting her along. Miss Poindexter waited, but nothing more was said, and she turned again to look at the rose. Mrs. Bickford aimlessly picked up syringas and flowering almond sprays, then laid them down again. She glanced out the window, then gave Miss Poindexter a long, expressive look. "I expect you're going to carry them over to the burying ground?" inquired the guest in a sympathetic tone. "Yes'm," said the hostess, now well started in conversation and in quite her everyday manner. "You see, I was going over to my brother's folks tomorrow in South Fairfield to pass the day. They said they were going to send over tomorrow to leave a wagon at the blacksmith's, and they'd hitch that to their best chaise, so I could ride back very comfortable. You know I have to avoid being out in the morning sun." Miss Poindexter smiled to herself at this moment. She was obliged to move from her chair at the window. The May sun was so hot on her back, for Mrs. Bickford always kept the curtains rolled up high, out of the way, for fear of fading in dust. The kitchen was a blaze of light. As for the Sunday chaise being sent, it was well known that Mrs. Bickford's married brothers and sisters comprehended the truth that she was a woman of property, and had neither chick nor child. So I thought it was a good chance to stop and see if the lot was in good order. Last spring, Mr. Wallace's stone hove with the frost, and I could take these flowers. I ain't one that can bear flowers in a closed room. They bring on a headache, but I enjoy 'em to look at. You never know what to put 'em in. If I could be out in the morning sun and keep flowers in the house, I'd have a garden, certain. she sighed. "A garden's a sight of care, but I don't begrudge the work," said Miss Poindexter gaily. She had only a tiny strip of land, but always had something to give away, and made her riches out of her narrow property. "A few flowers give me just as much pleasure. My sweet Williams is just like folks." "Mr. Bickford was partial to sweet William," said Mrs. Bickford. "Never knew him to notice any other sort. When we'd be over to Liza's, he'd walk her garden and say, 'Those is sweet Williams.' Many's the time I've heard him." "You ought to have a spray of 'em for his bouquet," said Mrs. Poindexter. "Yes, I put a sprig in," Mrs. Bickford replied. Miss Poindexter took a good look at the bouquets and found them nearly identical. Mrs. Bickford was clearly trying for absolute fairness. "I don't know, but you think it's foolish to tie 'em up this afternoon," Mrs. Bickford said, winding the first with stout string. "But I thought I could keep them in a bucket of water out in the shed with just a little draught of air, and then I'll have my time in the morning. I always sweep the setting room and front entry Wednesdays. I want everything nice going off for the day. So I thought to get the flowers done now. Why, it's almost 4:30, ain't it? But I shan't pick the roses till morning. It'll be blowed out better then." "The rose?" questioned Miss Poindexter. "Why, you ain't going to pick that, too?" "Yes, I be. I never like to let 'em fade on the bush. There, that's just what's a-troubling me." And she turned to give a long, imploring look at the friend who sat beside her. Miss Poindexter had moved her chair before the table in order to be out of the way of the sun. "I don't seem to know which of 'em ought to have it," said Mrs. Bickford despondently. "I do so hate to make a choice. They all had their good points. I don't know but what I think of one of 'em most as much as I do the other." "Why, 'tis difficult for you, ain't it?" responded Miss Poindexter. "I don't know as I can offer advice." "No, I suppose not," answered her friend slowly, with a shadow of disappointment coming over her calm face. "I feel sure you would if you could, Abby." Both of the women felt as if they were powerless before a great emergency. "There's one thing. They're all in a better world now," said Mrs. Poindexter in a self-conscious and constrained voice. "They can't feel such little things or take note of slights same as we can." "No, I suppose 'tis myself that wants to be just," said Mrs. Bickford. "I feel under obligations to my last husband when I see how comfortable he left me." "Poor Mr. Wallace had his great projects. He meant well and was an amiable man to live with, till disappointment soured his temper. He had an air about him, and dressed handsome when I first knew him. I don't know as you'd ever knew him in his prime." "He died the year I moved here from North Denfield," said Miss Poindexter. "I just knew him by sight. I was to his funeral. You were living in the Wells house then. Mary Becca Wade and I came by when he was sick to see if we could help. They used to say Mr. Wallace went to and fro like a mail coach and brought nothing to pass," said Mrs. Bickford without bitterness. "He should have had a better chance than this little town gave him. He had excellent ideas, but had never learned the machinist's trade, and something was always wrong with every model. I was narrow-minded when he talked of moving up to Lowell. I hated to leave my folks, and now I see I never done right by him. He had good intentions." One time, while serving jury duty, he met a man from a firm in Lowell. They talked, and that man was so taken, he said he'd find a place for him. Mr. Wallace was all hope. Somebody told me a man by the same name got patents for inventions like Mr. Wallace's after he died. Maybe he could never get 'em just right, but folks came from all around to see his machines. They worked rickety, but they were curiosities and gave him a name. Mrs. Bickford paused for a moment with some geranium leaves in her hand and seemed to suppress with difficulty a desire to speak even more freely. "He was a dreadful notionary man," said Mrs. Bickford at last, regretfully, as if that were a poor substitute for what she truly meant. "I recollect one winter he worked over my churn till it would run 3/4 of an hour if you wound it up. And if you'll believe it, he did all that while the cow was dry. And he was borrowing milk just to get along." She flushed and turned towards her guest. "Now what do you think of such a man, Miss Pendexter?" "Why, I don't know, but 'twas just as good for an invention," Miss Pendexter said timidly, but her friend looked doubtful and didn't seem to understand. "I asked him about it that spring when I was worn out churning with a borrowed one, and he'd taken ours apart to make some other contraption. No business sense, but well-meaning, and full of talk. Folks said he was good company. I see now he never had a fair chance. I've always regretted Mr. Wallace." "I'm sure you always speak well of him," said Miss Poindexter. "'Twas a pity he hadn't found businessmen to push his ideas." "I was very poor them next few years," said Mrs. Bickford. "But he never gave up, always believed he'd die with 50,000. I don't know how I got by, but I kept a pig, and Sister Eliza gave me potatoes. I dug greens in the spring, waited for berries, and managed. I was always decent from meeting till the last 6 months. Then I went in bad weather when folks wouldn't notice. 'Twas a rainy summer, so I got considerable preaching after that. My clothes looked proper enough on a wet Sabbath. I often think of them pinched days now, when I'm left so comfortable by Mr. Bickford." "Yes, you've everything to be thankful for," said Miss Poindexter, who was now as poor as her friend had ever been and couldn't dream of the comfort of keeping a pig. "Mr. Bickford was a very personable man," she added, drawn in by the intimacy of the moment. "Oh, very," said Mrs. Bickford. "There was something marked about him. Strangers always asked who he was when he come into a meeting. His words counted. He never spoke unless he had to. 'Twas a relief after Mr. Wallace, who was always talking. But Wallace made splendid company on a winter night. 8 o'clock would come before you knew it. I didn't listen to it all, but he had a deal of information. Mr. Bickford was dreadful dignified. At first I was sort of meechin' with him, for fear he'd disapprove, but I found out that was just his way. He'd done everything by rule and measure. He hadn't the mind my other husbands had. Calm, but he cut a dignified figure. He used most always to sleep in the evenings, Mr. Bickford did." "Them is lovely bouquets, certain," exclaimed Miss Pendexter. "Why, I couldn't tell 'em apart. The flowers are coming out just right, aren't they?" Mrs. Bickford nodded absently, and then, startled by a sudden recollection, she cast a quick glance at the rose in the window. "I always seem to forget about your first husband, Mr. Fairley," Miss Poindexter said bravely. "I've heard you speak of him, but he passed away long before I knew you." "He was but a boy," said Mrs. Bickford. "I thought the world was done with me when he died. But since then I've often thought 'twas a mercy. He came from a melancholy family. All his brothers and sisters had poor health. Folks said we was as pretty a couple as ever come into church. We were both dark with black eyes and a good deal of color. You wouldn't expect it now." Albert held up his head and looked as if he meant to own the town. He had a good word for everybody. I don't know what the years might have brought. Mrs. Bickford leaned over to pick a heavy-headed rose from the floor. I expect 'twas what they call falling in love, she said in a different tone. He was nothing but a boy, and I want nothing but a girl. But we was dreadful happy. I could hear him singing to himself in the field, plowing or hoeing, and he didn't know it half the time. No more'n a bird would. I don't know how's I valued his gift as I ought to, but nothing ever sounded so sweet to me. I ain't one for much fancy, but I know Albert had a pretty voice. Mrs. Bickford's voice trembled slightly, but she lifted the last bouquet and examined it. I must hurry now and put these in water. Miss Poindexter sat so quiet and sympathetic, it felt as if she'd been talking only to herself. Yes, they do droop some. It's a little warm here in the sun, said Miss Poindexter, but they'll all come up with enough water. They'll look real handsome tomorrow. Folks'll notice them from the road. You've arranged them very tasty, Miss Bickford. They do look pretty, don't they? Mrs. Bickford regarded them in turn. I want to leave them all pretty. You may deem it strange, Abby. Why, no, Miss Bickford, said the guest sincerely, though a little puzzled by the solemnity of the occasion. I know how it is with friends. Having one don't keep you from wanting another. I expect all friends find their places. But Mrs. Bickford didn't seem interested in the figure of speech, and still looked vague and anxious as she brushed broken stems with wilted leaves into her calico apron. I've done the best I could while they was alive, and mourned them when I lost them. And I feel grateful to be left so comfortable now. It seems foolish, but I'm still at loss about the rose. Perhaps you'll feel sure when you first wake up, offered Miss Poindexter. It's a case where I don't deem myself qualified to advise, but I will say, since you've been so friendly spoken, I was never married myself, Miss Bickford, but it wasn't so I could have the one I liked. I suppose he ain't living then. Why, I never knew you had a disappointment, Abby, said Mrs. Bickford, surprised. None of the neighbors had ever suspected. Yes'm, he's living, replied Miss Poindexter humbly. No, I never have heard that he died. Well, I'll tell you this, Abby. You may have felt lonesome and hardshiped, but they all have their faults, and a single woman's got her liberties, if she ain't got other blessings. 'Twouldn't have been my choice to live alone, said Abby, meeker than before. But I feel thankful for my blessings just the same. You've always been a kind neighbor, Miss Bickford. Why can't you stop to tea? Asked Mrs. Bickford with unusual warmth, but Miss Poindexter remembered her hostess's usual dislike for unexpected company and rose to leave. She glanced at the bright flower as she passed the window. It seemed to belong most to Albert, but she hadn't liked to say so. The sun was low, the green field stretched away into the misty distance. The next morning, she had lost all spirit for her holiday. Perhaps it was the excitement of the previous day's talk, or simply the bright moonlight night that had kept her wide awake until dawn, thinking of the past and the rose. The rose no longer felt like a flower. It was a choice between gratitude, regret, and first love, and she couldn't decide. It was a beautiful morning for a drive, but Mrs. Bickford was kept waiting. Her nephew, John, found social advantage lingering at the blacksmith's, and it was after 10 when they finally started. She carried 3 large, flat-backed bouquets covered with a newspaper to shield them from the sun. Petals were already scattering, and water leaked occasionally down her best dress. Even now, she had not made up her mind. She had given up trying and leaned back to rest as best she could. "Oh, what an old fool I be," she whispered aloud more than once. Loud enough that her companion respectfully asked, "What, ma'am?" But she made no reply. John was a handsome young man, but to Mrs. Bickford he was still a boy, her favorite among the younger family, and he returned the feeling with instinctive trust in her quiet sincerity. As they drove on, the summer day seemed at first too bright, almost unfriendly after the shaded shelter of home. She felt oddly exposed. Even the roadside trees appeared to watch her with a fateful stillness. A bird startled her, flying too close, and she became strangely conscious of the chase's movement, as if carried unwillingly. But John's company soon became a steadying presence. It was comforting to sit beside him, even if he had nothing to say. He was manly and cheerful, and she began to feel protected. "Aunt Bickford," he suddenly announced, "I may as well out with it. I've got a piece of news to tell you, if you won't let on to nobody. I expect you'll laugh, but you know I've set everything by Mary Lizzie Guilford, ever since I was a boy." "Well, sir," exclaimed Aunt Bickford in her turn, quickly roused into a most comfortable self-forgetfulness. "I am really pleased. She'll make you a good, smart wife, John. Ain't all the folks pleased, both sides?" "Yes, they be," answered John soberly, with a happy, important look that became him. "I wish that we could set up ourselves right away this summer. I ain't got much ahead, but I can work well as anybody, and now I'm out of my time." "She's a nice, modest, pretty girl. I thought she liked you, John. I saw her over to your mother's last day I was there. I expect you'll be very happy." "Certain," said John, turning to look at her with affection, surprised by her outspokenness. "Thank you, Aunt. You're a real good friend to me." He looked away, blushing scarlet over his sun-browned face. "She's coming over to spend the day with the girls. Mother thought of it. You don't get over to see us very often." Mrs. Bickford smiled approvingly. John's mother no doubt wanted her good opinion, but it was proper for John to tell his news himself, and in such a pretty way. No shilly-shallying about that boy. "My gracious," John said suddenly, "I'd like to have drove right past the burying ground. I forgot we meant to stop." Strange as it seemed, Mrs. Bickford had not noticed it either, caught up in the pleasure of the moment. At once she felt burdened again. John leapt from the chase and reached for the flowers. "Here, let me run with 'em," he said kindly. "'Tis hot in the sun, and you'll mind the hill. We'll stop again tonight. You can go up after sundown when it's cool, and stay as long as you like. You seem sort of tired, Aunt." "I don't know but what I will let you carry them," said Mrs. Bickford slowly. Leaving the rose to fate felt weak, but John was a smiling fate, and his offer was a relief. She watched him go with a sinking of pride. Her hands, having gripped the bouquet so tightly, now felt weak. She leaned back, afraid to open her eyes for fear of recognizing which bouquet held the rose, and giving in to an urge to interfere, she called out to him once or twice, but her voice became thin and high, lost to the chirping crickets. The bright light of the white stones dazzled her. Then, all at once, she felt light-hearted. The sky seemed to lift from the earth, and she gave a sigh of relief as John returned. "I know who I hope's got the right one," she murmured. "What a touse I'd be in. I don't know what I picked that old rose for, anyway." "I declare they did look real handsome, Aunt," said John heartily as he approached the chase. "I set 'em up just as you told me. This one fell out and I kept it. I don't know as you'll care. Can I give it to Lizzie?" He faced her now with a bright, boyish look. There was something gay in his buttonhole. It was the red rose. Aunt Bickford blushed like a girl. "Your choice is easy made," she faltered, and then burst out laughing. "Well, well, I guess the rose was made for you. It looks very pretty in your coat, John." She thought of Albert, and the next moment the tears came to her old eyes. John was a lover too. The Only Rose by Sarah Orne Jewett. Adapted and narrated by Querida Funck. Produced by True Voice Productions. Published by Lemry House Press.